Hey guys, Jim from Import Image Racing and welcome back to the channel. If you've been following along, you know we've been doing a whole bunch of draggy hits on our VAWRX, trying to knock those numbers down while not quite touching performance or tuning yet. But I do feel like it's time to start unlocking some potential on this vehicle, so today we're going to be diving into a budget shift kit. Stick around to see which parts we chose. Yes, we just cleaned her up. She is looking pretty good, pretty fresh, and it's a pretty decent day out. So why not get started with cracking open some modifications to the VA? So like I said, we're going to be doing some shift upgrades to the car today, and hopefully that can help lower my ETs. On top of that, just driving the car in general, these things are pretty known to have some very poor shifting capabilities, and for you guys who do or don't know, let's take a look inside the car to see what I'm saying. Once you get in, you'll happen to notice that this shifter moves around a whole lot. For example, when you're in first gear, wow, that's a lot of movement. Second gear, same thing. Also, not sure if you noticed, look at all that throw. Man, this is definitely, we're wasting tenths here, especially when we're kind of doing the draggy and we're trying to get the best times possible. All this kind of slop really needs to go. And then also just from kind of driving around town, you kind of get tired of all this sloppiness. Now that we've shown you where the problem lies, let's take a look at some of our contenders today. Some of the parts we're going to be putting on the car today, we will start with our Cobb short shift plate. This thing, I'm sure you guys know if you've had any of these like cable shifted WRXs, this is going to help lower that back and forth motion, or that basically rowing of the boat is what they like to call it. That side-to-side shift problem that you saw in first and second gear, we have our Cobb first and second gear shift lockout, which is really going to help tighten that up, especially if we're going from first to second gear and slamming it. You don't have all of that wiggle wobble between the gears. Next on our list is our Billetworkz shift bushing. We'll kind of get more in depth on what these parts do once we get under the car, but just kind of a visual for you, we're going to be replacing a rubber grommet down there with this solid billet brass piece here that's going to really help improve our shifting. And then finally, we're going to try something different here. A lot of other shift kits that I've installed or even shown on like the VB chassis, we usually upgrade like a transmission mount, which is a great upgrade, but instead of just showing you the same video over and over and over again, we're going to try replacing that transmission mount with a weighted shift knob from Billetworkz. Yes, now this thing is considerably heavier than the stock knob. And the reason why a weighted shift knob does so good on cars like this WRX is because they have all of these long, wild cables. And then once you actually put some weight behind that cable, it can help pull it into the next gear and feels a lot nicer in your hand. Like I had mentioned, I've done a whole bunch of these kind of budget shift kits for these cars, and instead of just showing you the same thing over and over, we wanted to try something a little bit different. On top of that, I also plan to do additional mount upgrades in the future. So I kind of wanted to stay away from just putting the same old group N transmission mount on this car and see what like a weighted shift knob with a very similar shift kit that we've already shown you might feel like. And at the end of the day, I'll tell you which one I think I would prefer, especially since both of the shift kits, the one that we'll put on this car and the one that I've shown on the VB, are very similar in price tags. No matter which one you go with, it's going to run you anywhere between $300 and $330. And like always, these are kind of a la carte shift kits, so you can decide that, you know what, maybe I want the shift knob and the transmission mount, or maybe I want the shift bushing and the shifter lockout. You can do all of that stuff kind of piece by piece, or buy it as a whole and maybe save a couple of bucks, but it's not something that needs to be all done at the same time. Either way, I'm going to be going a little bit more in depth as we start pulling some of these parts off, comparing them to the parts that we have on the bench, and maybe give you a better idea of what kind of shifter upgrades are in your future. Let's get to taking this thing apart. Got the car up on the jack stand, so the first thing we're going to tackle is our shift plate and bushing. And to do so, we're going to get underneath the car here, see if I can get a good look at it. And yeah, it's going to be hard to see from the camera, especially without a lift, but we're going to be removing this shield a little bit. We're going to take our cross member off just for the sake of being able to kind of reach everything under here, and then we're going to remove our roll pins and our guard. Now, see if you guys can see, there's a metal guard right here. And to get to that, we're going to have to at least partially remove it by getting rid of that bolt, and then I think there's two bolts back here that we can get and kind of like pry that out of the way, at least for now. Once again, once I get that off, I will show you with the shift weight one of the reasons why we chose to go with the Cobb shift weight over some of the other options, but unfortunately, I'm gonna have to get it all off first. Alright guys and girls, I'm not sure if you can see from there, but we've had a little bit of a plot twist. As I get under here and start pulling things apart, I'm not sure if you can read, but that says Cobb Tuning right on it. So it looks like this car has already been modified with a shifter bushing. Now that I look up here, I don't see a like an aftermarket shift plate, so it looks like just the bushing has been replaced. So there's that. I don't know. I think I'm going to pull this thing out of here because I bought a new one, so I like the Billetworkz full brass one probably a little bit better. This still has kind of like a nylon insert in there. Would have been nice to know before I got, under here doing all this kind of stuff, but I did purchase the car previously owned, so there is a few little, Easter eggs every time I kind of look and work on this car, but for the most part, we're going to keep going. We're going to get the shifter plate off, pull this bushing out, and still kind of, go on with our day. Here we go. We got our shifter bushing and our shift plate out of the car. I will tell you, this is not my favorite job to do on the ground. As you can tell, there isn't a whole lot of room under there. I would much prefer a lift for this job, but it can be done, so no complaining. One thing I will tell you, though, if you do plan on doing stuff like this, I would definitely make sure you not only have some decent quality jack stands, but always be sure to reinforce with the jack. So just in case, something happens, you're hitting on stuff, you're banging on stuff, grabbing on things, that, you're prepared and setting yourself up for success. That is always number one, safety first. Now let's talk about the removal of our parts. I will tell you, once again, it is pretty difficult to squeeze all this stuff underneath the car out, but we will go over some of the install stuff. For the most part, getting the bushing out, no real big deal. There's a couple of 12mm bolts in there that you just take off. There's some guards, some shields. You can move all of that stuff out of the way. As far as getting the actual bushing out, normally, it's just a rubber bushing there with kind of like a metal grommet where you can see this nylon one is for the Cobb, and you can just stick a screwdriver or a punch in there, kind of twist it, and for the most part, it pops right out. But as far as our shift plate goes, this is installed with a double roll pin design. So there is a larger pin here that goes in that hole, and then to keep that roll pin from collapsing and falling out, there is a second roll pin that goes inside this roll pin. Now to remove those, I use two different size punches. Right here, it looks like we have a 1/8 inch punch to get our small roll pin out, and then once that is removed, we have our second 3/16 punch. Then it gets our main roll pin out. Once you do that, you can just slide the shift weight off of the car, and then we can kind of take a look at our new Cobb piece in comparison to the factory piece and see what we're getting. Now that we're here, let's talk about the benefits of the parts that we're putting on the car. First and foremost, let's talk about the bushing. Normally this is a rubber bushing, so we would gain a lot by putting a full solid brass bushing in there. Normally the rubber would kind of move around a whole bunch and, the brass is going to be a lot tighter. Now, the problem is, with our plot twist, I have 2 bushings, but I spent the money, and I'm here to put parts on, so I'm definitely going to be throwing our Billetworkz brass bushing in. That's that. Next on the table, and probably the biggest player in the game, is going to be our shift weight. Now, the way this works is with our mechanical mechanism under there, we have a whole lot of cables and a whole lot of things working to kind of like a pulley system. As you pull one side, it moves the other side. But depending on where your pivot position is the more or less amount of input you have to give it in order to move the shift weight. As you can see from our factory shift weight, there is a pretty good distance from our center hole onto our dowel right here. And then with our adjustable Cobb, it's going to be hard to see without the dowel, but there is 2 holes that we have that can adjust the distance from our center hole. The closer our dowel is to the center hole, the shorter our throw is going to be. So we have 2 different options for our aftermarket Cobb. One is a 15% short throw shifter or a 35% short throw. So which one of these holes do I recommend? Well, that really depends on what other modifications you have to the car, especially when it comes to the shifter mechanism. In my experience, the shorter we make the throw, the notchier the actual shift mechanism inside the car is going to feel. Now, for me, I would tell you if you have a short throw shifter inside the car, like an actual Billetworkz short throw, or I think they have like the STI style short throw shifter in there. If you're going to run that kind of mechanism in tandem with a weighted shifter like this, I would tell you that we would do our 15% outside the car, and then whatever your short throw shifter inside the car is going to give you a nice balance between the notchiness and the short throw shifter. But for me, I plan to leave the shifter inside the car stock, especially at this time, so we are going to up that 15 to our 35%. Once again, in my experience, if you tend to do the 35% out here, and then you update to a shifter later inside the car, a lot of times it can be very notchy in between gears, and for me, just kind of slamming them in, that's just not a risk I want to take to make sure that the car goes fully into gear when I let the clutch out. Another thing that I like about the Cobb shift weight over maybe some other brands is once you do this job, you're going to realize it's really tight underneath that car, even if you do have a lift. So with the Cobb branded shift weight, I can just kind of remove a handful of bolts, then get the shift weight off, then I can reinstall the Cobb without getting rid of the entire shift weight cover. Now, the only reason that's a big deal is because the final bolt for our shift weight cover is above on top of the transmission and can be semi-difficult to get to, especially if you plan on doing this job on your back in your garage. So for ease of installation plus the ability to change the actual throw, I chose the Cobb shift weight for our installation today. With that being said, Cobb has provided us with some Loctite. We're going to put a dab on our threads and throw it into our 35% shift hole, get all of this stuff back into the car, and then we're going to make our way inside the cabin to put our 1-2 shift stop on. Let's do it.
Hey now, here's the full experience. Man, it's hard to get good angles under here, I'll tell you that. But it's on. You can see the bushing is in, our shift weight is on, and best part of all, our factory shielding fits. So we didn't have to remove anything or deal with that, pesky bolt that's all the way on top here. You can't even see from the camera. So everything bolted back up. Everything is in nice working order. So we do have one additional kind of bracket that we want to put here, basically a shield that we want to put back on. Then we can put our transmission mount cross member back on and move up to the top of the car.
All right, well that is significantly shorter than it was before. I think that's the most of what we're going to gain out of today, especially with the weight and with, since we already kind of had the shifter bushing. But the other two things that we're going to be doing to the car are going to be inside the cabin here. Basically, one's going to be underneath the boot, and the other one's going to be our shift knob. So at this point in time, I'm happy with the throw. Let's get this thing off the jack stands and get to the inside of the car. All right, boys, next up is our Cobb first and second gear lockout. So we're gonna hop into the car, and then we're gonna pop this whole little center console piece thing out here. I think I can get just the boot and this little trim ring out without taking all the sides out. Let's see if that's still a true statement. Ready? Ah, yes. Yeah, a little bit of pull action. We'll get this whole little trim piece up here. Let's get the key out so it stops dinging at me. We just kind of pull this up. We'll take the knob off now since we can get our whole little piece going. There we go. And then once we get this trim piece off here, there's going to be two little pieces of hardware that we'll remove. We'll put the dowels in that Cobb provides for our 1-2 lockout, and then we can kind of line everything up. Here's a little closer view inside of our shift column. From the factory, there's two pieces of 10mm hardware that we remove. Then Cobb provides you with these two dowels, which we put a little Loctite on and then threaded them in. And then our initial set of 10mm pieces of hardware that we tighten up. Then we can go ahead and grab our first and second lockout, which we will put right over top those two dowels. Just like that. Now you can see the holes here are elongated, so you can kind of move this in and out depending on what other shift components you have or any aftermarket parts to kind of dial in that first and second gear swing. So what we're going to do is throw our washers on, throw our nuts on, and then we'll kind of fine tune this in so that I feel we're right in the money where I want this shifter to be. Boom, there we go. We have our 1-2 shift stop all dialed in. Now, to kind of give you a better idea of what this does now that it's installed, take a look. When we go into first gear, there's very little left to right play anymore, where this thing used to kind of be like you could swing it all around, put it in second gear, and it would swing back and forth pretty hardcore. Now, since our shift stop is up against our shifter when it's in first and second, we don't have a lot of that left to right jiggle anymore. And this is going to come into play when, say, we're on a launch and we're just slamming into second gear. There's not a whole lot of that shake. Or if you're just cruising around, there's not a whole lot of slop in your shifter while you're just resting your hand on it. All in all, I think all of these upgrades are going to feel pretty good, but to top this whole thing off, we're about to install our Billetworkz shift knob, which is our matte black light bulb look, which I think is a pretty cool look, plus it's got the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 reverse, and it just says WRX. I like the matte black. It just kind of matches some of the other components I have in here, not to mention my carbon fiber every which way. So I think it's a good accent to the car, but let's go ahead and get our shift boot back on and installed, and then we will throw our shift knob on. Our shift knob installation is going to be pretty easy, pretty straightforward. In the kit, not only are you going to get your weighted shift knob, but you will also get a jam nut and kind of a thread adapter from the small threads from your shifter to the large thread that's actually inside our shift knob. So the first thing we're going to do is slide on our lock nut. And the reason we do the lock nut is when we go ahead and put this on, depending on where we lock it in is going to be where our 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 is going to be. We're going to go ahead and toss our adapter on, and then let's put the knob on and see where we're at. Well, if I tighten it all the way up, the numbers are kind of facing me. So what I'm going to want to do is take our knob loose and then spin our lock nut up until it faces the right direction. There we go. It's all lined up. Come take a look. Well, that was fun and a pretty exciting day. We found some stuff I didn't quite know about yet, but we got all of the parts that I wanted onto the car. But no matter how good it looks or how easy or hard the job is, it doesn't mean anything unless it feels good out on the street. So we're going to go ahead and take this car for a drive and see how I feel about all of our new shifter upgrades. And then I guess we'll see if I did the right thing or if I should have chose something else. Let's take it for a drive. There you have it. We just took it for its first maiden voyage with our brand new shift kit on it. I know you're dying to figure out, what's my opinion on it? Do I really like the choice that I made over some other options that we did, let's say, on our in-house VB? I don't think you're going to be able to beat the weighted shift knob in conjunction with the shift plate. That just changes the whole aura of the car while driving around, and I think from a day-to-day stoplight to stoplight, that is going to be by far your best combination on the car. I also suggest that if you're going to be in the wheelhouse of doing that shift plate, always consider the shift bushing. As you probably saw, there was a shift bushing on the car that I didn't even know about, and it wasn't something I knew about until I went to replace it. So if you're just going to do a shift bushing, I don't think it's going to be all that beneficial unless you pair that with something like the shift weight itself. Like I said, if you do plan to do something with a little bit more aggressive driving, like you want to get behind the wheel and you want to start banging gears and dropping those ETs, then I would tell you that the transmission mount over the weighted shift knob would probably be the way that I would go. Now, because I do plan to do additional mounts on this car, this isn't the video I thought that was necessary for doing a mount, because I'm going to be doing not only engine mounts, but tying that together with transmission mounts in the near future as well. All in all, depending on if you go with the transmission mount or you decide to go with the weighted shift knob, we're dialing in at right around $300, which I think is a fantastic price for all that you get for a shift kit like the one that I put on the car today. Feel is great. Budget was good, but we still have to do a draggy hit. Now, I'm not convinced that I'm going to lose any real ETs with this, although, feeling inside the car is going to be half of the problem anyway. So if I feel confident, I think I'm going faster, then I'll tell you what, maybe I'll go a little faster. We'll have to find out. Now, the other thing is, I don't really have any of my camera gear for mounting the phone, so I guess I'll put it in the passenger seat and see what we can do. I can't promise you great footage, but let's try to break our new record.
30. 60.
Well, bummer. We didn't set any new personal bests, but the car sure does feel a whole lot better, especially just driving it around town. Once I get kind of some more seat time, since we have changed something with the shifter, I'm not 100% just jamming it in there right yet because I'm afraid of, maybe not making the gear anything, but it is fun to kind of give this thing a rip anytime that I can. Either way, if you enjoyed this video, be sure to hit that like and subscribe so I can give you all kinds of new content with this car. Not to mention I got like a whole stack of stuff I'm putting on anyway, so it's gonna be a good time. Be sure to hit that like and subscribe, and for all of the best deals on the web and in the world, be sure to hit up importimageracing.com. You guys already know. We'll catch you on the next one.